Well, hello, everyone. I am just so delighted for the podcast guest that we have today. Um, it is a great delight to introduce you to Vernon Nickerson. He is an African American man living in California. As I've gotten to know him, we really have so much in common, and he has very graciously volunteered, volunteered to
Yeah, we can say that.
yeah, we really want to explore end of life issues with end of life issues for the African American community, and see what is lacking, what's great, what we can learn from each other in making end of life care something that is universal. And I've learned a lot, and I'm just excited to introduce you to Vernon. So I'm just going to go ahead and go there so you can meet Vernon.
Okay.
Great guy. Hello, Vernon.
Hello, Claire.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. So before we get started, I guess I'll just kind of give a brief thumbnail of me.
Okay.
Currently, I am the chief school coach at a little entrepreneurship called Vernon Nickerson School Coach. So in my day job, I work with parents and students. I have a particularly specialty in special education because that's where my certification and most of my practice has been. And so I work with the parents and the students basically to give them or remind them really of the ability and the agency that they have to advocate for the best that public school districts particularly can provide for them. So there are individualized education plans, and I help with those things. There are homeschooling parents these days that I do seminars for, and then I do individual consultations.
Let me also just give some background because I just didn't even touch on that you're a Northwestern graduate. You're, have a master's from Fuller Theological Seminary, which is kind of fascinating to me. You're a marriage and family counselor. I mean, you've industrial engineer, you've kind of done the gamut and have had an interesting life. And you've also been caretaker to your mother who, and other people in your family. So
Yes,
you come with a lot of authority not just because you're African American and I'm not, but because you have the spiritual background and you have a deep faith and you have a family that you care a lot about. And
yes.
And you've just experienced this in a way that I cannot, and I would say most of my listeners have not. So let's explore a little bit about, I'll just share with you some of the research that I found. So I went to the National Institute of Health, and they have done studies about end-of-life care in the African American community. And I found out that it was just really fascinating because when you subtract the income differential and you subtract the access differential, two separate conversations that we could just focus on, there were still three things with the African American community that prevented good end of life care. And that was knowledge of access to services and historic mistrust of the healthcare system and spiritual beliefs. And as I was looking at those three things, I was like, well, I mean, clearly advanced care planning can be done by anyone. Finding out about hospice and palliative care can be done by anyone. Spiritual beliefs is something that's so unique to the African American community, the deep faith that they have that holds the family together, and the church and the community that holds the family together. But what I think right off the bat that a white person could not understand is this distrust of the medical system. Well, maybe not with COVID, there would be some people that would, but tell us why African Americans have a mistrust of the healthcare services. Why the African American community have a mistrust of the healthcare system?
Well, all right. I think that it has to do with trust. You mentioned that the research was showing a distrust. Trust for people who came into an environment that was hostile in the transit to the destination already had trust violations. So imagine if when you landed in Australia, that you had been greeted with hostility, that you had been treated as property. And so the very first thing that happens is you're inspected. Now, most of us, when we go to places that are new, yeah, we're excited, we're expecting to find new things.
A welcome.
Well, for those, a welcome, but a welcome that is positive. Yes, there was a welcome, but it was, I have to take an inventory to see how much of my property made the Middle Passage. Because you've probably, no doubt, you've seen the pictures of how the slave ships were loaded.
Yeah,
And it was as if you were loading a can of sardines.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then what folk, what we don't realize, because we're so modern, we have bathrooms. And even if you don't have a bathroom, you might even have an outhouse. You have those kinds of basic needs. But imagine in a ship where you still have those kinds of basic functionings going on, but they're all happening in the same space that you're sleeping and eating and resting in. It's I can't even imagine it.
Right.
And I think I've seen, well, all kinds of documentaries. So let's stick with this trust being violated. Trust is something that human beings have to earn. So once it's violated, so once you and emphasis on once trust is violated, the first thing that needs to happen is that trust has to be repaired. And so and then I'm still going to look at you like, and I'm going to consult with other people, and I'm going to try to find someone who knows you, or who knows the institution, or who knows the hospital, or a friend of a friend of a friend. And it doesn't have to necessarily be Black. It can be any color, just someone that knows the medical person, the hospital, the nurses, at the place where I'm seeking treatment, or the resource that I'm going to use for my health.
Do you distrust medical services?
Well, I live in the internet age, so I can do my due diligence, and I can find out where they went to school. I can find out what their former patients think of them, good, bad, and indifferent. And I can ask, and what I typically do is ask people that have already been living in the neighborhood that I've moved to. Mm-hmm. Now let's go back to this whole thing of end of life.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for my totally volunteering to do this interview was I thought back over my family history, and I had watched my great-grandparents basically do in-home care for end of life, because doctors only came when you were sick, or it was an emergency situation, or you were sick, and they were trying to save your life.
Right.
But for the end of life, when someone was just, and in the case of my great-grandparents, they were farmers. They lived in Greensboro, Georgia. And you work, you farm, you go through the seasons of life, you come to the end of life, and your body is just kind of worn out. And so what is the end of life care? It is tender, loving care. It is, what do you want to eat? I'll make it. Where do you want to lay down? I'll make it. You want to go for a walk? I'll go for a walk with you. You want to just sit on the porch? I will
And
sit on the porch and rock.
and that is the model that I think everyone can learn from for quality end of life care. Maybe in poor Georgia, no health care accessible, that was what you did. But I think what we're learning is that to have quality end of life at the end of life, to have that family, that care, you just don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That is the core of what, in my opinion, makes for a good natural death, is to have your family around as the body does wear out.
So in some sense, for me, looking back, life was a community project. If you lived in a small town or a medium-sized town or even a big town, somebody knew you and somebody knew the family. And there was certainly in my remembrance always a spiritual community. And so you had family. And I guess if there's one thing tonight that I would just keep hammering home is end of life care. How are you fixed for family?
Or friends, at least,
Well, and in those cases, you're right, Claire, but even friends were considered part of the family.
Yeah.
When we first met, I talked about fictive kin, and I remember you saying fictive, and I'm like, yes, as in fiction.
Yeah.
As in fictional. But that is still to this day, and I think it will be forever a part of Black families, wherever they are.
That's wonderful.
We have, to this day, I have my play mom who lives in Long Beach. I'm in Van Nuys, so I'm north of Los Angeles. She's south of Los Angeles, but that's still my mom.
Yeah.
And even more so, but she knows my mom. She knows my brothers. We both. She was basically my boss because she was superintendent of Sunday school when I was a middle school age Sunday school teacher.
Yeah.
And it was just like being asked to do this. They had an opening, that was the need. It's the most difficult group of people to teach in a Sunday school, well, pretty much in any setting. But it's a group that I love because those were my best days in school.
Yeah.
Middle school, I had this English teacher that had me reading. He basically did an independent study with me because he was also my piano teacher. But I want to stay focused. All of what I'm talking about is community, trusted friends and family.
But tell me more about, and I may be getting into the weeds too much here, but are there spiritual beliefs or cultural spiritual beliefs that are specific to the African American community that affect death or thoughts of death? Or there may be no difference in any other racial group, but I'm just wondering if you can think of anything specific to the African American community.
Yeah, one thing comes up, and it's that we have an organic living relationship with ancestors. So ancestors are venerated. You just took a sip of your beverage. We offer that whenever we're thinking about ancestors. It's called libation.
Oh, wow.
And that is distinctly, in my knowledge, an African continent spiritual community value that, and so you don't, there's not this, well, there's not this business of death being some unknown thing. The philosophy is life after life. Now, in some of this, and so I think the key thing that probably the researchers encountered was that African American spirituality, although it may be expressed in the mainstream religions that we both have in our knowledge base and in our worldview, well, the big missing piece that's not in those mainstream religions is this idea of life after life after life. So in other words, even though Revelation is a part of the New Testament, we don't really get concerned about the book of Revelation at all.
Really?
It's more dramatic than the rest of the text,
Yeah.
for sure. It is, and it's more frightening, and it's certainly more mysterious because you don't, so like the whole 4 horsemen of the apocalypse thing.
Yeah.
Not really. It's like, okay, it's there, whatever, but I ain't worried about that. Because what I have learned about and what I have sung about, and here's another big distinctive difference too,
Singing.
Our music, our worship.
Yes.
Has its origins in life after life after life.
What do you mean life after life after life?
So we transition from this form and this reality into a different place with a different set of realities and a different set of forms. But the love that we shared goes, and God, I wish, okay, if I relax, the songs will come back to me. None other hath ever known. And the things of this world will go, oh, okay, turn your eyes upon Jesus. There we go. Look full on his glorious face. And the things of this world will grow strangely dim in the eyes of his love and his grace. That's where we're fixated upon. So, and by the way, the other value is one of unconditional love. And I'm going to use the modern language because, again, this is what the training and clinical site gets you. The unconditional love, unconditional positive regard. And so no matter what the history of that person is, when we sing, when we think about heaven, yeah, we think of a city just 4 square and the streets paved with gold. But we also say it's howdy, howdy, and never goodbye. So that so that really, so this idea, so, and here's how Christianity really connects, because when Christianity and the sacred texts, Old Testament, New Testament, speak of a scarlet thread of redemption, we add to that, it's a plumb line.
Yes.
So when it connects with source, that's a permanent connection. That's an organic living connection. If you go, I have this running conversation now that everybody should have a Church of God in Christ funeral.
It's
and
a cappella.
I'll tell you why.
It's a cappella.
Well, so everybody is there.
Yeah.
The folks that got along with you, the folks that hated your guts, the folks that but everybody's there, and it's a family celebration. Now, you really only need to do about one of these because they tend to last 4, 6, 8 hours. If you happen to maybe scroll past, whose funeral comes to mind? Aretha Franklin's funeral comes to mind.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
That was a marathon.
Yeah, that was a great one.
Yeah, and that was, I think, an example of a Church of God in Christ funeral. Everybody's there. Everybody's going to have their time. Time is suspended, really.
Yeah.
And it really is about being there in that moment. And so, and I want to come back to, because remember, we started this conversation about distrust.
Mm-hmm.
All the things that I'm talking about have a foundation of human to human trust. And yes, in the course of human events, because we're all imperfect, trust is violated, but it is repaired.
Mm-hmm.
And so when scripture talks about not letting the sun go down on your anger, well, that is lived experience in my experience of my family. So, even if it got to the end of the day, somebody apologized to somebody, because nobody was going to go to bed, because that in that space, we don't know the day or the hour. So there was always this business of wanting to settle one's affairs before you laid your head down on that pillow. Now, how does that fit in? Well, so in some sense,
Forgiveness.
yes. Yeah,
Forgiveness.
reconciliation, truth and reconciliation. I know in my heart, I shouldn't have said that, or done whatever it was done.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna apologize. They're gonna look at me like I'm crazy, because whatever. But we're gonna settle that before a new day begins. Why is that? Because at the beginning of every day, oh hallelujah, got another chance. And I get chills because again, for everything that I'm telling you, there's multiple songs to go with it. So there's a Kirk Franklin, who's pretty big in Black gospel music, does this song Another Chance. And by the time he finishes, I'm gonna go into church vernacular. Honey, them folks is laid out by the time he finishes Another Chance, because we know that that's true. We know that every time we're waking up, we're getting another chance. And so it's important to close out, to close out the end of the day and then celebrate that new opportunity.
Yeah, I think
now,
of the
how does
picture. I think of the picture of Judith Jameson and the Alvin Ailey Dance Company doing Revelation about going across the River Jordan. And that is something that is a metaphor, but it's so indicative of that community crossing together across the River Jordan to redemption. Yeah.
And so one of the things that the researchers, I think, probably found is, when it comes to end of life care, medicine has a place, but it is as if we have invited whatever medical official care is needed, but now you're in our home.
Okay, so
you're an honorary member of our family. So we're still going to, allow you to minister in the way that you minister. But what you need to understand is, we're going to minister in the way that our ancestors and our family members have always ministered to. What does that mean? That means, what do you want to eat? Do you want to lay your head down? And you just want me to sit quietly, wink if we're good. Yep, let your I don't know if you did it on purpose, but blink your eyes if you hear me.
And so another piece of that, though, Vernon, was your mother was an advocate for you. Your family would be an advocate for the dying person, but oftentimes there are circumstances in just the age that we're living in where families are estranged. Fortunately, maybe not so much in the African American community, but where there's a big emphasis on the need for advanced care planning. So African Americans, Well, I'm going to just say this because there are about 3% of people, period, forget race, that have good advanced care planning. So how does that fit in with adjusting to the needs of what really supports a good end of life if you don't have an advocate or a spokesman for you?
Yeah. So now we fast forwarded to my current situation. So one of the things that was expected, and it is typically expected of all the male children, is that they're going to be launched independently. They may or may not marry. We don't get as much pressure to partner. In my own case,
Why is that?
I made, why don't the
Why
men
is
get that?
that there's not pressure to partner? I don't understand that.
Well, actually, some of that is cultural, having specifically to do with America, because historically, you fought, you met someone, you had intercourse, a child was born, but there was never a guarantee that that unit, that mother, that father, and that child would be an intact family.
Mm.
It just, and so imagine then that, I would say, if my great grandparents were here, they would probably have memories of someone that had a baby and then the master came in. Okay, we want that asset, because now keep in mind, when you're legally and by the Constitution at that time not considered a human being, you are simply property with a value attached.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you couldn't have the conversation that we're having now.
Yeah.
Because number one, if we were back in those times and anyone heard me speak, they were like, "Ooh, somebody taught him how to read." Who taught him how to read? Doesn't he know that just that we're gonna find, and I'm gonna tie this directly to that stupid Texas abortion law. We don't have to worry about law enforcement in enforcing the law. Everybody is deputized, and anybody who reports that Claire and Vernon had a conversation, and he was talking about all these words I don't understand and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, you would be in trouble and I would be in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now let's get back to what that core, if the core value is family and extended family, if the core value is care within that family unit, again, yeah, I'm not going to be that trusting of the medical person, but I will, if they're willing to serve, I'm willing to be served by them.
Mm.
Now, I want to go right back to advanced directives, living wills, things like that. That in itself requires a level of trust.
Yeah.
Because even though I knew exactly what those things are, I have those things, my mother has those things. One of the unfortunate memories that I have is that my mother's probably last 2 months on this earth were not as good as they could have been, because no one read her living will or her advance directive.
Okay, back up. Why?
Well, when I questioned the doctor about this, when my mother was still alive, and after they had revived her, because it says a do not resuscitate, and all that, they had the do not resuscitate, they had the living will, they had the advance directive, didn't read it. He said, I don't have time to read all of that information.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that totally, it broadsided me and it broadsided my mom. And one of the ways that came out is, so her heart stopped, they brought her back, but in order to bring her back, she had to be put on a ventilator, and so there was something that was like pumping the air in and making a heart beat, and they had all the tubes and wires. Well, that was why she wrote the advance directive the way she wrote it.
Exactly. So whoever in that advanced care plan, was there a medical proxy named that could have said, stop? Did you say stop?
I was not consulted. I was right there in the hospital, but it was so they did the surgery at night. I was right there in the hospital when she went into surgery, but then it's like, okay, you have to go wait in the waiting room. I heard the code blue. No one came to me ever. And so I thought, now inside though, because in my family, we have this thing, and I don't know if, I can't tell you that this is common to all families, but in my family, when people are making their transition, the energy switches and we know when something's wrong.
Mm-hmm. No.
My mother would tell you the story if she were here, when they called her Aunt C Baby, but that was a nickname for her favorite aunt. She saw Aunt C Baby on the back porch as Aunt C Baby was making her transition 60 miles away.
Yeah. Yeah. That happens more
So
often than not.
And I'm putting all this detail in there because then when I come back and hit you with the word trust and trust violation, you'll know.
Yeah.
So
No.
I'm sitting right there. I'm seeing people, because it's like after midnight in the hospital. So ain't nobody there except people who are there for their relatives and the nursing and the doctors. And I see people running around. Because Marina Del Rey is not that big. It's pretty much all on one floor. I don't even think they have floors. It's just like spread out. So I hear the code blue, I run around. So I called a dear friend and we just stayed on the phone. Because I'm like, I know, as far as they haven't come and told me anything. And she heard the ding, ding, they have those little cute chimes that mean stuff to them. And, well, again, my mom was a nurse, so I knew somebody had coded. And so then what you start doing is saying, well, no one has come and told me anything. So I'm going to trust and just and stay calm and call my friend, and we'll talk, we'll be chatting and talking, and whatever's going to happen is happening. And I know that my mother is loved and I did the best that I could under the circumstance. I wish my brothers were here. I wish that one of them would have picked up the phone and we would have been talking, but none of that happened. They never came and talked to me. The only thing they came and said was, oh, the doctor saved your mother's life. And so by that time, she was in recovery and they were like, well, you've been here all day and all night. Go home and get some rest and come back. When I came back to the hospital the next day, they're like, oh, Mr. Nickerson, we're glad you're here because we need your approval to start giving your mom psychotropic medications because we think she's got psychiatric issues on, because the minute she woke up, she yanked everything out of both arms. And I said, so my first thing was, well, there was an advance directive. You weren't supposed to do this.
Yes.
She is angry. I'm like, so we're not giving psychotropic meds because the reaction that she had is exactly the reaction that I expected that she would have, because this is not what she wanted.
Right. And
all of her life, she had trusted doctors, nurses, colleagues, our pediatricians, her OBGYN, her cardiac specialist, and I knew them all because I was her primary caregiver for the last 2 years of his life. So I met all these fine people. Problem was, they were all in Wisconsin.
Right.
But in my mind and in her mind, this is why we have the advance directive.
Exactly.
Because we live in modern times. And there's no guarantee that we will be where our primary residence is when something happens. But we have a basic level of trust. Now, all that had been violated.
Right. when when you spoke up and said, that there was a misinterpretation, that you didn't follow the advanced care plan, were there adjustments then to follow the advanced care plan?
Well, I want to go back. So remember, the doctor said, I don't have time to read all that. So you can't misinterpret something that you never read.
Exactly.
You basically just, you screwed up. I'm not going to say, well, go back and kill her, because that's what, so that wasn't
Right.
even in my mindset, but that's where I was. And so at that point, I went into, okay, this has happened. What's next? Let's concentrate on healing, restoration, recovery. Do what you need to do now. But the first hurdle that we had to overcome was, well, if she can't breathe on her own 24 hours later, then we unplug everything and we let, quote unquote, nature take its course. So what did I know? I know that even when people are in medically induced comas or whatever, or sedated or whatnot, they can still hear. So I went in and had a chat and explained what had happened. Well, she knew, what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And, basically at that point, I went into, no, we're not going to talk about suing people. We're not having that conversation right now. Right now, what we now have to focus on is, can you breathe on your own? So what was my messaging? I love you, some chit chat, which I've long ago forgotten. But the other part was, and now we're going to heal up and get the heck out of Dodge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Work with me here. Yeah. And I didn't say that. I didn't say this next thing, because in hindsight, what I should have said is, it's okay if you want to go ahead and do what you wanted to do anyway. And what was, and know that I love you, and we'll go on. Well, no. Again, when I was already in healing recovery, let's get the heck out of Dodge. Mm-hmm. And I would take you out of here now, but that would be against a medical directive. Mm-hmm. And if anything happened, because when we first met, I talked about in my mother's journey. After that, we were at UCLA Ronald Reagan, which gave the best team care. And and I want to say even the social worker was talking about end of life care when we were there. Yeah. But my mom responded so well to the level of care that is at UCLA Ronald Reagan, which I'll send people. The only place I send people in LA is Cedars-Sinai and UCLA Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. Vernon, you're touching on so many different things here, and of what is good end of life care and what is not. And I think what I'm hearing you point out is that once you're on that medical treadmill. So what I'm hearing you say, Vernon, is that trust is just a huge issue, certainly with the experience that you had with your mother. And there were also the Tuskegee Institute biomedical research that they did on African Americans, and an interesting facts about an African American doctor named Charles Drew. So if you could just give us some kind of idea about the horrors of the Tuskegee Institute situation, and then the irony about Dr. Charles Drew. I think that would be eye-opening for the listeners.
Okay, and by way of introduction, both of these stories have to do with trust and trust violations. I'll let your listeners figure that out. If we have time, we can go into it.
Okay.
My mother was a nursing student at Tuskegee during the time when the United States government wanted to find out what happens when Black men get syphilis and what is the entire course of the disease that we already knew would lead to death. And so they Tuskegee Institute was a site because it was trusted by the African American community. It was venerated by the African American community. They knew the doctors, the nurses, the nursing students. Tuskegee Institute is that kind of a small Southern town. And so from that place of trust, they knew that the men would come willingly, because Tuskegee to this day has a venerated, respected, and honored tradition of quality health care in that part of northern Alabama. So they came, they were, they were given a drink of water, but they were never given the penicillin, which would have saved their lives, because the whole point of the study was to see how the disease progressed without treatment. Now, you also, again, have to come back to the fact that we were not considered, we biologically and scientifically, yes, these are human beings, but the only place you could have really gotten away with that is at a Black hospital in a Black community, because it would have never, now I'm saying this, I could be totally wrong, but I would say in that same time when that Tuskegee study was going on, which was from the 50s through the 70s, because it really didn't end until 1972.
Right.
And so to give a frame of reference, in 1972, I was in the 7th grade. I had never known any when it came to hospitals and doctors, pediatricians, dentists, eye doctors, whatever have you, I would have never known anything that cruel. I certainly at that point in time had not had trust violated by anyone in the medical community.
In this case, cruel by withholding treatment that they knew
Correct.
would cure syphilis. They wanted to see the trajectory of the disease. And I understand, consequently, not only they went home and infected wives and had children with congenital syphilis. And so it wasn't just these men that were not being treated. And they were, I think there was a controlled study group with men that did not have syphilis, or anyway, they had a control group, and it went on for basically 40 years. So go ahead.
But what we understand from all medical research is you have a group that doesn't receive the medicine or receives a placebo or something that is not known to work. And then you have the group that receives nothing. Well, they did it. They basically said, these people will receive nothing and these other people will be healthy.
And was your mother aware of this?
You see that? Yes. Yeah. But now keep in mind, nursing student, that's about the lowest rung you can get on the ladder of healthcare. You can be sent home. So if the threat was, if you reveal this, if you treat these men in any way, your career is over. And so, I want to say now my mother's mom had been a teacher, so it was a real two-edged sword that was facing her. I can't even imagine what that was like, because I can't go home a failure. I simply cannot. And so this is what they're needing me to do. So this is the nurse. This is the way I'm thinking that she was thinking.
Yeah.
I'm trusting the process.
Yeah.
They're going to do something for the family. They're going to do, so maybe they won't help the test subject because they're the test subject, but surely the family, I'm trusting that they're getting some support, that their health outcomes will be pretty much guaranteed. And then that's where you have this intersection with this faith, this unshakable faith that come what may, God is still in charge. And that this life, time is filled with swift transition, and there can be all kinds of bad things that are happening. But the next life that's there will be better.
Yeah.
So you know, so that's what that's kind of my summation of the whole Tuskegee thing. But the point is, trust was deeply violated.
Yeah.
And there weren't that many, there weren't, oh my God, you had Meharry and you had Hanneman. So you had Meharry in Tennessee and Hanneman in Pennsylvania. That was three, count them, three in this entire United States of America, Black run university teaching hospitals.
Yeah.
So trust and believe when this came out and it was Tuskegee,
Huge.
do we, in my mind, Claire, there is every reason for anybody Black not to trust. So if you're in these, so you imagine yourself, we've already experienced Jim Crow. We've already experienced people being whose lives were taken simply because of the color of their skin. People who were mistreated, so we'd already experienced those things. And then when it came, it's, I'm putting my fist in my chest because it's like a blow. It's like a body blow.
Yeah.
This was Tuskegee Institute.
Yeah.
This was one of only 3 Black healthcare providers in the United States of America.
Well, I mean, I'm getting, I'm feeling that kind of deep generational pain, and yeah, I'm feeling that. And the irony of Dr. Drew, tell us about the irony of that particular situation.
So Charles Drew was a cardiac physician. His main contribution to medicine was the blood bank system, so that when someone needed emergency care, if they were in a hospital with an emergency room, there would be the blood type and whatever, or the plasma that they needed, and they could do transfusions to save lives.
And he's African American. We'll just
and he's African. He is African American, because that comes into play, because we're still talking about all of his good work came when segregation was still an issue, and it came down to the blood. If we're going to segregate the bodies, we're going to segregate the body fluids. So if you're Black and we have Black blood in the blood bank and you're a match, no worries. If you're Black and you wind up in an emergency situation where the closest hospital is really technically for the South where the accident occurred, a white hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, that trust comes into play. And I would imagine Dr. Drew, because he had worked with white, Black, and all kinds of physicians, and because he was a physician, he had a trust in his brotherhood, in his guild, which was doctors. Mm-hmm. Didn't matter what race you were. If you had that MD and you had gone through medical school, you were in a guild.
So what happened to him?
He basically died. Now there are different narratives.
Well, tell about what happened.
Died. He was so seriously injured that, according to some people, there was nothing that could have been done. Now, the problem with the historical record is that time had passed by the time the historical record was made. People had died. And so we never got to hear, okay, you were the nurse when Dr. Drew was brought in. What happened? Okay, you were on the treatment team when he was brought in. What happened? Mm-hmm. Time passes, memories fade. And so as much as it's been documented that he was injured so seriously that a blood transfusion might not have saved him,
it could have.
It could have. And again,
was in
trust.
A car accident.
I'm so glad you started out with trust. When your trust has been violated over and over and over again, and something like this happens, and there's the least iota of, okay, we will never know. And honestly, Claire, we won't.
Well, so the irony of this is that here in Australia, Europe, Canada, everywhere that they have a blood bank system, it was developed by this man. And in his death by a horrible car accident, You know, he happened to die in the South, the segregated South, and he may have been able to have survived if he had had a blood transfusion, but because of the segregation of the blood, that we don't know, but that could have been an issue. And I just want to say to everybody that has any kind of connection to World War II and beyond that, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of lives have been saved because of blood transfusions and the blood bank system that this man developed. And people don't even know who he is for the most part. So I just wanted to really highlight the contribution that Dr. Charles Drew has given to the world.
I want to treat you the best ways that I treat myself.
Yeah.
Because I know you had asked for things that people could practically do, and I feel like, yeah, that's really where it starts.
The golden rule is so simple, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And yeah, if we just all lived a life like that, I'm going to have to end our conversation, but I want to thank you for educating me and for highlight. I mean, it wasn't on purpose, but where this conversation really went for me was about the importance of trust that we have in ourselves and in our family and in our community and in our medical community, and that we're going to be there for each other. And I think that if we could just end on that note, that I want to thank you, Vernon, just for being there for me, and vice versa. If you ever need anything, I'm here for you.
Claire O'Berry, I thank you for this opportunity. What I say to people all the time, if it helps, use it. If it doesn't, oh well, move on. So I hope that this has been helpful. You've acknowledged that. I appreciate you saying that, and I hope that as it goes out, that it remains helpful.
Thank you, Vernon. We'll talk again soon.
You're welcome.